Well, it is 9 o'clock Happy Valley time, which means it is time for the Penn State Alumni Association's coffee hour. Good morning, everybody. Welcome into the Zoom room. For those of you who are joining us on Facebook, welcome to the audience that is just joining us on Facebook Live. We have a great guest with us today on Coffee Hour, Bob McKinnon. He is the director of the Moving Up Media Lab. Bob's joining us today, and we're going to talk about his story, his research, the great podcast that he has started, and an upcoming children's book that is on the horizon. So we look forward to talking with Bob and sharing his story with you in just a couple minutes. Let me know who you are and where you're zooming in from. Go ahead and drop that information in the chat in the Zoom video window, or you can let us know on Facebook in the comments section. You're watching the Penn State Alumni Association's Coffee Hour. Again, welcome everybody in. I see the Zoom room is filling up here. I see we have an audience out on Facebook. Welcome to the Alumni Association's Coffee Hour. We are going to be getting started here in just a minute or two. Thank you for joining us. Let us know who you are and where you're zooming in from. You can use the chat in the bottom of your Zoom video window, or just go ahead and drop that in the comments on chat. We'd love to welcome you in wherever you are tuning in from today across Nittany Nation. This is the Penn State Alumni Association's Coffee Hour. I see Greg from New Jersey. Good to see you this morning, Greg. Where else would you rather be than a Zoom full of Penn Staters? I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association, and welcome to the Alumni Association's Coffee Hour. Each week on Coffee Hour, you can expect to hear the voices of Penn Staters talking about what they're passionate about, and you can expect to feel the pride and the power of the Penn State Network. As always, we're recording this session and closed captions are available for this event. You can find that information in the chat in Zoom or in the comments on Facebook. So today we're going to talk with Bob McKinnon. Bob is the director of the Moving Up Media Lab, whose mission is to inspire people to reflect on who and what has helped them get to where they are in life. He's the author of Actions Speak Loudest, Keeping Our Promise for a Better World, and the upcoming children's book, Three Little Engines. Bob is also the host of the podcast Attribution, distributed by PBS Chasing the Dream, and an adjunct professor at both the Parsons School of Design and the Colin Powell School of Civic and Global Leadership. Among other courses, he teaches the economics of social mobility and redesigning the American dream. It's now my pleasure to welcome Bob McKinnon to the Alumni Association's Coffee Hour. Bob, good morning. How are you?
Morning, Paul. I'm good. Thanks. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. I'm excited about our conversation today. Why don't we go ahead and get started right at the very beginning and let folks know how you became a Penn State Nittany Lion?
Yeah, so it was the only school I applied to. I lived in, I grew up in Boston, outside of Boston. I'll talk a little bit about more of that later. But our family moved to rural Pennsylvania, York. When it came time to apply, I picked the best school in the state, and was fortunate to get in, and that started the journey here. I was like a lot of Penn Staters, I was the first person in my family to go to college. So it was sort of a unique experience in terms of even how you apply and choose colleges and things like that.
Excellent. When you were at Penn State, what were you involved in as a student?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I would say comparative to what's available to students today, very little. So what I mean by that is I thought that the purpose for college was to go there, to study, to do well in your classes, to make friends and things like that. A lot of the formal activities, I just didn't I didn't raise my hand for, to be honest with you, or I couldn't afford to. So like I didn't even purchase a student football pass anytime while I was at Penn State, although I went to plenty of games when my friends had an extra ticket or I'd scalp or things like that. It was just as a first generation, college kid who didn't have a lot of resources. I felt a real obligation to just do well for my family. In fact, strange little sort of a side note, each semester I would tape an index card above my desk with the name of a family member of who I was studying for that semester. And so that was part of the inspiration. And don't get me wrong, I certainly did my fair share of socializing with friends and partying and things like that. But you sort of a very limited window in terms of what kinds of activities. One thing I guess I should note is that I am a 2-time football champion at the university.
Okay.
Of course, not on the team, on IM co-ed. So we won the championship twice. So that was great.
Hey, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story, Bob.
That's right. That's right.
National champion at Penn State.
That's right. I should have just left
it there. Is a believable story, right?
No one's checking rosters.
Exactly. Well, it sounds like your gratitude work started at a young age, and that was kind of grounded in you from the postcard or the index card that you would put up of the name of a family member. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, it was one of those things where I felt a lot of gratitude, a lot of pressure, and responsibility, but it was really sort of an inspiration for just trying to do well. I was there.
It's funny. It reminds me of when my dad dropped me off my first year of college. The last thing he did was he wrote something on a Post-it note and stuck it on my desk. And I still have that Post-it note today. And it was just more of a command. It was, don't forget anything. And that was always up on my cork board above my desk my first year of school.
It's awesome. One thing that research would tell you is those little flashbulb moments, those little sort of sayings or tricks can play a real significant role in how you think about your journey and how you remember it and how you inspire to sort of do well for yourself and others.
This is the Penn State Alumni Association's Coffee Hour. I'm Paul Clifford. I'm joined today by Bob McKinnon. He's the director of the Moving Up Media Lab. Now, Bob, you've done a lot of work on social mobility. Let's first start with the definition. How would you define that as it relates to your work? What is social mobility?
Yeah, so most would define social mobility as the ability to move from one economic rung to another. So often it's defined in terms of your ability to move up relative to your parent station in life or where you started out. So it's often looked at economically, but we also know that there's a lot of other factors in terms of how we define resources. There's social capital, there's happiness scores, there's all kinds of ways in which we like to think when I use the language of moving up, right. Are you able to sort of ascend to achieve the opportunities you want to pursue and the possibilities that you're capable of.
So you have a rather unique social mobility story yourself, and I've heard you share it, and you credit Penn State with at least playing a part in the role, or at least playing a role in your success. Would you mind sharing that with our audience today?
Yeah, of course. So I grew up originally in Chelsea, Massachusetts, which is ironically the birthplace of Horatio Alger. So one of the first sort of people who was associated with rags to riches or bootstraps mentality. And we didn't have a lot growing up. It was just my mom and my brother and my sister and I. And she was a bartender raising 3 kids on her own. And we had a lot of challenges, right? And so what was interesting, though, at a very young age, she had, for whatever reason, nicknamed me the Little Professor because I wore glasses and liked to read a lot. But I wasn't reading Tolstoy. I was reading like Red Sox box scores. And so, but that sort of set in motion this idea that I could go to college, right? Even though she didn't know anyone who had gone to college and we didn't have any in the family who'd done so. So she then met, this sounds like a cliche, she met a truck driver at the bar she worked in. And he moved us, swept her off her feet, I guess, and moved us to rural Pennsylvania, to York. Right. And so now I was in the heart of Pennsylvania. And when it came time to think about, and even even there, we had our own sort of share of college or challenges. So we were in rural Pennsylvania. We lived in a trailer park for a really long time. And so going to college was not sort of taken for granted financially or otherwise, right? And so fortunately, I was able to I just applied to Penn State, one college. At that time, at least the cost of application was even a bit of a barrier, right? For any, so you didn't want to apply to a lot of colleges. Got into Penn State. I don't even know if I visited the campus before I showed up. I don't remember. But I was fortunate because I got student aid and Pell Grants and scholarships and was able to get to the university. And research will show you that the benefits of a college education in terms of student mobility are profound. And some universities, there's been studies about this, they do a really good job of making sure that students, who come from less leave with more. And I was really fortunate, not only in terms of just the education I got, but my first job came as a result of a Penn State alumni. So I was struggling trying to find a job. It could have been, that I looked rough around the edges. I think I probably had a mullet at the time and sort of a shiny Sears suit, and had sent out all these letters and nothing sort of came of it. Finally got a connection to a Penn State graduate who invited me in for an interview. And then I got a job at Saatchi & Saatchi, which is a large advertising and marketing firm, where I worked for the next 15 years and taught me a lot of what I know now and apply to the work of trying to make the world a better place.
Well, that is certainly a testimonial to the power of the Penn State network, right? Certainly you come to Penn State and the expectation is that you get a world-class education. But there's also other things. You mentioned the out of classroom experience that our students now have, but it's also access to one of the most powerful networks of alumni in the world. And certainly if you're not taking advantage of all three of those things as a Penn Stater, then you're leaving something on the table through this Penn State experience. Bob, I'm wondering if you would talk a little bit about your research and what are some factors that contribute to social mobility, kind of the psychology behind how we think about our own life outcomes compared to others.
Yeah, so I guess there's two ways to look at it, like what contributes to social mobility, and then how do we think about it? There's been a tremendous amount of research in the last probably 20 years, especially, that looks at different factors, some of which, you can drill down to the zip code in which you grew up, right? And some zip codes and some towns are just more inclined to sort of have the structures in place to help students rise, even if that's a relatively poor or under-resourced community. The role of parents is critical, right? So if you live in a community with where there is a propensity for two-parent homes, even if you yourself only have one parent, that's a big plus. If you have one parent and you're dealing with a lot of difficult stuff, the ability for that parent to serve as a buffer, meaning that they help make sense of the difficulties you're going through, is critical. We know education, as I mentioned before, plays a really important role. Having the benefit of decent health, right? So that's important. Luck is really interesting. The thing that's fascinating, Paul, is we did a research study several years ago that asked Americans what they thought contributed to social mobility, right? And 90% of Americans essentially said that hard work was essential, right, to achieving the American dream, which I think we'd probably all agree with. But it's not just hard work, right? So hard work makes success possible, but not always probable. When you looked at some of the other factors that people cited or didn't cite, it was amazing that, for example, luck was at the bottom. Like only 30% of Americans think luck has anything to do with being successful, even though who you're born to, what country you're born in, those are all sort of things that are not in your control that some people might say is luck. So there's a lot to unpack there in terms of the variety of factors that contribute to whether someone moves up or not. From a psychological perspective, though, I think that's where I've really learned a lot, and it's been fascinating and has been a real opportunity to sort of try to make a difference. So if you've ever gone out for a run, for example, or you've stood at a particular place in State College, you've noticed this phenomenon of headwinds and tailwinds, which is that we're just generally predisposed to be more aware of the wind blowing in our face than the wind at our back. And that metaphor applies to how we think about our success. We are more aware of the obstacles that we face than the tailwinds or the people or the factors that may push us forward. And that sort of leads to another sort of interesting psychological phenomenon, which is called fundamental attribution error, which is that we generally as humans have a propensity to overestimate our own agency and underestimate the environments in which we live. There's another study that was really fascinating that showed that even people who had made it, like say they climbed the ladder, the thought is that maybe they would be more likely to be compassionate to people struggling. And research suggests that that's not always the case, that sometimes people who've gone through a struggle are actually less compassionate to people who've never been through it before. So to me, there's just a whole body of research out there that points to the way in which we think about social mobility and why some people succeed and some people don't is really complicated. One of the things we've been trying to focus on, again, coming from research, is that if you come at this straightforward and you sort of try talking about sort of privilege or, you were born on third base, and thought you hit a triple, that kind of language actually just leads to a lot of defensiveness and not a lot of good conversation. Instead, what we try to do is if you just ask people the right kinds of questions to reflect on their own experiences, they're more likely to sort of have an aha or realize something that maybe they didn't previously sort of think about. And it ties to a quote I use a lot from Galileo, which is that you can't teach a man anything, but you can give him the tools for discovery. And one of the best tools I've found are questions and reflection.
Absolutely. It reminds me of the Joe Paterno quote that hard work and preparation is where luck most likely occurs, right? And it's so I'm not necessarily surprised by the where luck actually ranks on the survey that you've quoted. I'm not sure if you pay any attention to the work of Gary Vaynerchuk, but Gary V has been pretty outspoken on the role of luck.
Mm.
One of the exercises that we do here that I wonder if that's part of your work is whenever we achieve some sort of success at the Alumni Association, right? We take a look back at that success and we ask, what are some of the common characteristics of when we've been most successful? What are some of those things that have been kind of characteristic of that success so that we're conscious of it, so that we can repeat it as much as we possibly can. And one of the characteristics, which I think is maybe some corollary to what you're talking about today, is that we rarely achieve anything as individuals. That everything that we do, and this is quintessential Penn State, right?
Yeah.
It's because a team has come together to make something happen. It's why the name on the front of the jersey is more important than anything that might be on the back of the jersey, right? But it sounds like, a little bit of what you're alluding to when you're talking about headwind and tailwind is our consciousness of the team behind us in that tailwind. I wonder if you might speak a little bit more about, you gave the gratitude example of that kind of awareness of the people around us who are helping us get to where we're going.
Yeah. So it's great that you do that exercise, at the Alumni Association. I mean, there's a variation of that I've heard called dialectical bootstrapping, which is essentially this sort of, imagine it's almost like peeling an onion. You keep sort of you talk about an achievement and say, well, what if this didn't happen? And then what if this didn't happen? And you sort of peel it back and you realize how deep and far that goes. And so, like, even if I talk about my education, like how deep am I going to go into that? I could just say I'm happy to get it, or I can say I went to Penn State. I can tell you the whole story behind land grant colleges, which I just learned recently is more complicated than I even sort of had assumed, right? And it's pretty fascinating and humbling. You can talk about I received the Pell Grant. Well, how did the Pell Grant come to be?
Right.
There was a man by the name of Claiborne Pell who championed it, right? And just as an interesting sort of aside, a couple of years ago, I did this program each day for the month of November. I thanked someone who had been critical to my success. And I thanked Claiborne Pell. And I posted a picture on Facebook and explained his story. He was an interesting character. He actually used to cut off the sleeves and the pant legs of his suit and go jogging in that. He's pretty frugal. But so I posted that picture and I thanked Mr. Pell, because without him, I wouldn't have been able to go to Penn State or go to college, right? And the outpouring of affection for this man, who is now long gone, was remarkable. Thank you, Mr. Pell, all these comments, right? And so I think people, to discover more about your story and the people who are behind you is so wonderful. It does fill you with gratitude and appreciation, and also the desire to support someone else. Like, we know that social capital is contagious. The more you realize it, the more you share it, right? And so I know a big thing at Penn State and with the Alumni Association throughout the university is mentoring, right?
Yeah.
So if you are reminded of your mentors, you are more likely to want to mentor others. And so that's why it's so important to make sure that we can have as full of an appreciation for our story as possible.
I wonder, I know we didn't plan on going in this direction, but you talked about Penn State as a land grant and some of the things that you've recently learned. And I think it's a fascinating topic, because for all the great that it's done in terms of providing access to education and what being a land grant means to service and to the ag and engineering and the mechanical endeavors, right, that our country, at least during the industrial age, was built on. There's a problematic history to how some of that land was obtained, right? I mean, it is beyond problematic, right? It's land that was taken from indigenous people, right, for to be sold off so that there can be these land grant institutions across the nation. Talk a little bit about some of the learnings that you've had in that space recently.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I just discovered that fact myself, right? I was talking with, in preparation for the commencement address I gave at the university, I was talking with one of the archivists at the library and learned about that history. And I had been walking around with a sense of pride around, being the product of a land grant university, whose goal was to essentially make education more available for, quote unquote, the common people like myself, people who are first generation college kids. So that I wore it like a badge of honor. And so when I discovered the history that you just described, I was taken aback, right? Now, it didn't make me feel any less pride around the intention of what was done, but it gave me more of an appreciation for, the origin of that, right? And a deepened sensibility to just some of the wrongs that sort of are, have been committed in the name of something better, but have had, really unjust consequences for populations of people, right? And so to me, it was interesting. I was on my podcast, I was talking with Natasha Trethewey about this very topic. And she's a two-time U.S. Poet Laureate, Pulitzer Prize winner. Her book, Memorial Drive, is wonderful. I encourage people to go get it. And I was telling her this story, and she said, I think her response was, "Wasn't it wonderful when you learned that? In the truest sense, like a sense of wonder, like now you know more. Now you can do something with it, right?" And we went on to have an interesting conversation about race in our country and some of the other problematic parts of our country's history. And it was almost like a model for how you want to have these conversations, right? Which is to say, we're all better when we understand more of our history. And to be able to have these conversations where we don't feel threatened by them or guilty, but really able to sort of come together to have a mutual understanding about the real injustices, the challenges that different groups and populations have faced over the course of time because of things that have been done, historically. They're just important conversations to have, and to create the space where those can be done is really tricky, but essential.
No, absolutely. And look, I was an undergraduate history major, and I've just become more aware of this history, right? I've studied all of it. But what I never failed to do, whether it was consciously or subconsciously, was to make the connection between the two time periods, right? The connection between the land grant and what that meant for education, but also what it meant to native populations, and how there's a corollary impact there.
Yeah. And so, I mean, so with that, I mean, the reality is, if you graduated from Penn State, like I did, and so many others, is that you owe a debt of gratitude to those peoples whose land was taken from them. At the very least, our gratitude, if not our apologies, right? We didn't actually do it, but we certainly benefited by it, right?
Absolutely. Speaking of your social mobility work and kind of topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I know your research has shown some commonalities between the more socially mobile and less socially, commonalities between people who move from one rung to another, like you've described. Mm-hmm. But we all are aware that not every racial group, not every socioeconomic status has the access to to the mobility that some others might have. Mm-hmm. Well, what are some of the findings along the lines that you've encountered in terms of other barriers that might be in place because of race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status?
Yeah, well, despite landmark legislation like Brown versus Board of Education, I mean, we still to this day have a de facto segregated school system in some of our countries, right? Which just segregate it's segregating not only by race or income, but by opportunity. And how we address that is a real challenge. That goes back to the historical barriers that we've had with housing policy and housing segregation. And one of the things that I'd learned through this journey of work, and specifically from people like Sandy Darity, who's at Duke, who's recently written some really interesting books on reparations and other topics, is the role that housing plays in the passing of intergenerational wealth.
Right.
And so if you think about how many people where their parents may have taken out a second mortgage just to pay for their kids' education, right? Or that house becomes the means by which their children are able to get a house. And if you were of a certain, race at different points in this country, your parents or grandparents were denied the opportunities to purchase a home, right, in certain neighborhoods, which then didn't allow them to accrue that wealth they could pass on generationally. And so there's things that are sort of just built into some of our systems that have obviously been unfair barriers that others have faced. And I think we just need to acknowledge that, right? The other thing I'll say, which is sort of a flip side to this, is that any conversation that we have about this topic or others, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, I think it needs to really make sure we're creating the space for anyone to be able to bring in the fullness of their lived experience, right? All of our lives are unique. We all have different kinds of things that have gotten in our way or that have helped propel us forward. And, there was a recent study that was done that looked at a variety of different, diversity and inclusion, practices, and especially in the workplace. And they were found, unfortunately, not to be especially effective in the long term. And one of the reasons was because the people you're trying to sort of get through to felt defensive, or they weren't open to it, or they didn't feel as if they could actually share their story. And I know that in many cases that may be secondary to the real injustices that we're trying to address. But the reality is if we don't create the space where we all feel comfortable having the conversations and bringing whatever our experiences were, then that becomes a real barrier to sort of really being able to see the fullness of challenges that different people and populations and communities face.
Earlier in our conversation, you alluded to the concept of happiness and how that relates to the work that you've done. I know there's been some great work out of Harvard, some research on happiness. I love the example of, I think it's really hard to define what happiness is, right? I ask my children all the time, are you happy? Are you, And you always get kind of the standard kind of out of the box answer. Yeah, I'm happy. I love the story about the Olympians though. And when you look at the podium at the Olympic Games, Olympics are coming up in a couple of weeks. We'll all see examples of this. But the champion, right? They asked them about happiness, and their response is, and you can see it on their faces, right? Their response is one more of relief, right? That they worked so hard, and that all of that hard work wasn't for naught, and that they were relieved that they were the champion. You look at the face of the person who was the silver medalist, and a lot of times it's a look of disappointment, right? You finished second in the world, which, by many standards is a wonderful accomplishment. And yet there's the disappointment that they're not on that top rung, right? And then you look at the bronze medalist, right? And in this example, with somebody who was probably predicted to finish 5th or 6th, is standing there with the bronze medal, and they're the happiest person on the podium because it was unexpected, right? I mean, and so it's interesting to me that if I were asked to rank those emotions, I would have put the person on top who won the gold as the happiest, right? And the person who's the most disappointed as the person who got 3rd. And yet the reality more often than not is has a lot more to do with the frame of mind of where you're standing there, more so than what was actually achieved. How is happiness, played out in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I think there's a really interesting relationship between happiness and success, right? And it's not always the healthiest relationship. For example, some people equate success to money, right? And yet research would show that your degree of happiness peaks out once you make around, $80,000 to $100,000 a year. And obviously that would need to be sort of adjusted for where you live in the country, right? But it's not to say you don't need $1 million to be happy. There is also, you mentioned the relief of the gold medalist. There is this idea that even when someone has achieved success and they've climbed the ladder, right? That often comes with a tremendous amount of insecurity about and fear of falling back down the rungs. And so you're literally holding on for dear life. And there's been research that shows that the lifelong health effects of people who have moved from poverty up, to higher rungs on the economic ladder are significant, even to the point where they sometimes will have lower life expectancies, right? Just because the stress of getting there. Most recently, there's been some interesting research around whether the pursuit of happiness makes us unhappy. So happiness being a state that we should enjoy in the moments in our life and not feeling as if we need to sort of constantly be on the lookout for it. You see things, most people would be able to relate to the feeling that someone might get if they're scrolling through their Facebook feed and they see other people being happy.
Right.
It often makes you less happy because you're not experiencing, their vacation or what have you, right? And so I actually think that happiness follows gratitude, not the other way around. So if you are finding ways in your life to be grateful and appreciative for where you are, then you will be more content and happy. And I think ultimately probably more successful as well.
It's fascinating. I was on a call last night with our New York City chapter, and Cale Sanderson was the featured speaker, our multi-time national champion wrestling coach, 4-time NCAA champion as an individual wrestler himself. What you just said really, really resonates with me because he's kind of a living example of that, right? His whole talk, it was almost impossible to get Coach to talk about himself. He was talking about his wrestlers and how they've contributed to the championship. He talked about his father and how his father was his coach, his 2 older brothers. It was impossible to get him to talk about himself. And yet at the same time, so he was showing gratitude all throughout the evening. And yet at the same time, he was talking about never being satisfied and continuing to work hard. And I think the reason why he, clearly experiences happiness, at least when he's talking to audiences like he was last night, is because he has that balance between the appreciation of his struggle, right? The gratitude that he shows to the people around him who've helped him get to where he is, but also that mindset that he wants to continue to move forward because of all the people around him who are there to support him to be and stay at that level. I thought that was kind of a fascinating example of what you're talking about today.
Yeah, the one thing I'd sort of add, I mean, like as a society, we are just, for obvious reasons, we have a tendency to hold up extreme success,
right.
Olympians, celebrities, et cetera. And, in working on this topic for so long, I'm always blown away by sort of everyday success.
Yeah.
The person who's doing well in their community, but has time to coach his kids' little league team, who is so well respected because of what they're doing. The woman who's coaching girls on the run, with little fanfare, or volunteering in their community, or in their schools, right? Who has time for their family vacations and relishes them, right? Who seems to have their priorities straight and a great deal of balance. And so I would love if we, as a country, sort of talked a little bit more about what that looks like, instead of the extreme examples, which, sometimes can feel unattainable. And right. Ironically, when we think about them, make us feel as if we're not sort of, doing enough.
Yeah, I think about the people around me that I admire the most. And it's, I have a couple colleagues, one coaches a local high school track team, and they find the time to do really good work for Penn State and be involved at that level. We have another team member who never misses his daughter's high school basketball games, right? He's there for everything, and yet does a solid job. And it's because he's been able to find that kind of balance of what's important and what makes them happy. And yeah, I think about the people that I admire, and it's those people, right? It's not, I don't want it to come across that I don't admire Coach Sanderson, because I clearly do, and he only works a block away from me, so I don't want him to come down here and twist me into a pretzel. But it's that everyday hero that's inspiring as well. You are the director of the Moving Up Media Lab. Can you share a little bit more about your lab and the work that you do?
Yeah, so several years ago, I had long since moved from a career perspective from sort of traditional advertising and marketing to start a organization where 100% of the work we do was working with nonprofits and foundations to try to advance their causes, right? And so was very fortunate to work with some of the best organizations in the world, like the Ford Foundation, and the Gates Foundation, the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and many others. And then I was at this critical juncture in my own life where I was trying to make sense of like how I ended up where I did versus other people I grew up with. And I was also seeing in this work that there was this limiting belief. If you were trying to work on educational reform, but you could point to a couple of kids who made it out of a bad school, then your answer might be, well, why don't other kids work as hard as they did? And so it was this sort of flawed look at how we think about mobility and the American dream. And so started a small nonprofit called the Moving Up Media Lab, which was intended just to inspire people to reflect on their own journeys, with the belief that if we did so, we'd feel more grateful and appreciative for where we are, and also that we'd feel more supportive for those people who maybe are struggling. So each year, we essentially launch a new product out into the world. The first one was the research study I mentioned earlier. Then we did a quiz called Your American Dream Score, which Paul, you asked earlier, like what factors contribute to mobility. That quiz is your ability, allows you to answer 13 questions about your own life, and then based on your answers, will tell you how many factors you had working for you and against you. We then launched a tool called Your Dream Team, which allows you to name all the people who have helped you along the way. We launched a podcast during the pandemic called Attribution with Bob McKinnon, which essentially is a series of conversations, not like similar to this, where we're talking with experts who are doing work to understand the psychology of the American dream, but also talking to people who are living it. And so they're sharing their own stories and having conversations that maybe are different from ones they've previously had. So all the work is intended to sort of figure out how can we inspire more people to reflect on how they ended up where they are, and to get people to support those who may be still struggling.
Interesting. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about the podcast and how people can find that. I've listened to a couple episodes. I think it's fantastic. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the Attribution Podcast.
Yeah, so it stemmed from it was very organic. I was having these kinds of conversations with people, right? To understand their research. And I write a weekly note that sometimes summarizes it. And in writing, this blog or whatever each Monday, people were saying, well, hey, have you thought about a podcast? Or I'd like to learn more. And so finally I was like, well, I'm having these conversations. Why don't I record them? And so I've been really fortunate to have some wonderful guests who have been so willing to share their stories. So, the first guest was Shai Davide, whose research was the Headwinds, Tailwinds stuff I mentioned before. We've also had people, like Nick Kristof, who himself, he's a writer for the New York Times now, but his journey was really interesting. In the town he grew up with, I think it's something like a third of the kids on his bus when he went to school are now dead. And so him trying to understand through his book, Tightrope, what happened, right? Like, that's a fascinating conversation to have. I just so happened to years ago be in a basketball pickup league with a guy who I didn't realize would go on to become the celebrity chef Aaron Sanchez.
Okay.
So, I played basketball with this guy for years and had no idea that we had similar stories to share about our dads or our view of parenthood. And so that was a phenomenal conversation. And so the goal is just to basically sit down, have really honest and authentic conversations about, life's journeys. And, hopefully if you're listening, then you will leave a little bit more inspired or grateful than when you first hit play. And have also been, I should note, very fortunate that with a lot of the work that we've done, PBS and their initiative, Chasing the Dream, has been huge supporters. So they help underwrite and distribute that podcast, which has been a godsend. So anyone can find the podcast on essentially any platform. They could go directly to our website, movingupusa.com. They could go to PBS, and they can also find it on Apple and Google and Spotify and places like that.
So, a lot of your work has been aimed at, people like you and me, understanding success, understanding what the American dream is. But your most recent project is actually aimed at a different audience. You have the Three Little Engines book coming out, aimed at the children's audience. So tell us more about that project.
Yeah, so part of the work that we try to do in general, or that I try to do in general, is just, what kinds of stories are we telling about success and mobility, right? And, should we re-examine a lot of existing and traditional narratives that we've heard for a long time throughout our lives and the history of our country? And so in this specific situation, actually, there was an article that was forwarded to me by Shai, who I mentioned previously, written by Maria Konnikova, who is also recently a guest on the podcast. And she, is in the New Yorker, and she basically asked Shai at the end of this article, what in your own life do you do to reflect your research? And he said, I can tell you what I don't do. I don't read The Little Engine That Could to my kids, because it's not fair, because some kids can't, even if they think they can, right? So obviously the mantra of that book is, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, right? And it's an important belief to instill in children that they can do things. So it's important. But I went back and I had a copy of the original, because I've got 3 kids, and I read it and I sort of saw what Shai was saying. I wondered if there was a way to tell that story in a different way. And so in this story, it's essentially just the little engine that could. She has a very similar journey that she has in the original, where she, struggles a little bit, and eventually I think I can, and gets over the mountain. But her 2 friends don't. And at first she's like, well, aren't they working hard? What happened? Right. And she goes on, because she's asked a series of questions by the station master, to realize that these other engines, her friends, had different journeys than hers. And then she comes to the realization of like, oh, wow, it's not just about hard work. There's other things. You can have a tree that falls in your tracks. You can have, a heavier load you have to carry. And so in rewriting it, it was essentially sort of this idea of we need to start young with the stories we tell our children so they understand, that different people have different journeys. Obviously, the parents who are reading this book, it's an opportunity for them to have a conversation or a reflection on where they as parents are in their journey and how they have that conversation with their children. And hopefully, if the book does well, it's also an opportunity, to add to the conversation that we need to be having as a country, right, about what success looks like. And so, whereas the original was talking about, I think I can, this version is more about, I think we can. And the opportunity and obligation we have to help others who maybe have different journeys and more obstacles on their tracks than we did.
Absolutely. And just to our audience, so we are dropping the links to both the podcast and where you can find the book at Penguin Random House. All those links are in the chat. So go ahead and check those out when you get a moment. Bob, you recently were back here on campus. You had I know you talked about your football career here at Penn State, but you actually got to perform in Beaver Stadium, maybe not as a football player, but you were the commencement speaker this year for the Belisario College of Communications. What was your message to the class of 2021, after one of the most challenging years in probably the history of higher education and especially here at Penn State?
Yeah, so I'll get to that in one second, Paul. I just want to go back because there's something I wanted to say earlier. You had mentioned the role of Penn State and how people had helped. And when you talked about being on the field at Beaver Stadium, it reminded me that I had actually been there once before. Right. And that's when I was able to, through some work I was doing at the time with the Big Ten Network, feature the outstanding work that Sue Paterno was doing with the Special Olympics. And I've been fortunate a couple of times. My first book, Joe Paterno contributed a chapter to it. And then there's been other people at the university who either through their research or through their support have continued to participate or promote different work that I've been doing. So I'm always especially appreciative for folks who so willingly give of their time to each other.
I have to stop you there because I wasn't aware of the connection with Joe and him helping you with your first book. Do you have a Joe Paterno story that you can share with us? We get people to share their Joe Pa stories, and most of them do great impersonations. You don't have to do the impersonation, but I wonder if there's something that stands out to you about your work with Coach.
Yeah, unfortunately, that was all done through sort of an intermediary, so I didn't have a lot of direct contact with him. I did, however, get to spend several days with Sue, who is just a delight. I can't imagine a more kind or generous, person. And, I was able to spend a little time in their home, which is obviously so modest. It's just a salt of the earth, right? And so connected to the university. So, I can't help you out with your question, but I can sort of speak to how wonderful the experience has been with Sue.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about the commencement experience.
Yeah, so the commencement, I got to be honest with you, it's a strange thing. I don't know why it was there, but it was a bucket list thing for me, right? I always really, maybe it's because of where I came from, maybe it's because of the gratitude I had for the role Penn State played in my life, but to be able to have the honor to be asked to come and speak in front of, at that point, 3 colleges in the live ceremony and then the entire university in the virtual one, was just so humbling, right? And so, but it was interesting. Like when I first thought about it, and again, even using the language like bucket list, quite honestly, I was like, oh, this is great for me. It's like, I'm excited to do this for me. Right. And you go and you do this research about what makes for a great commencement speech. And it was shocking to me that in all the things I had read, never was there any advice to actually talk to a student. Right. And so fortunately I did that. It caused me to basically rewrite what I had started because I got a deeper appreciation for how challenging this last, year and a half has been for them. I was reminded about how important the last year and a half of college was for me and the opportunities that I had that were now being denied. So the first thing I wanted to do was to essentially say, like, I'm sorry, this sucks. And it's, and it's not fair. And the second thing I wanted to do was to say, this doesn't need to define the way you look at your experience here, and what you do moving forward, right? That, at one point I mentioned, I think, that you could fill Beaver Stadium 7 times with alumni who are ready, willing, and able to help you, as they had helped me, like I mentioned before, right? That they have demonstrated their capacities for sacrifice in terms of the way they were able to follow rules and to look out for the safety of their fellow students and faculty, right? So, they're just capable of doing some profound things based off of the experience that they've been through. And so, the hope was to just basically say some words that would maybe make them feel a little bit better about what they'd gone through, to make some sense of it, moving forward, and to say that, we're here for you.
Amazing. We've dropped the links for the commencement, both of those commencement addresses in the chat. So check those out as well. They were fantastic. I had the chance to both be there in person and then watch it again last night in preparation for our talk today. And they are, it's really well done and well delivered. This is the Penn State Alumni Association's Coffee Hour. I'm Paul Clifford. I'm joined by Bob McKinnon. He's the director of the Moving Up Lab and the author of The Three Little Engines, an upcoming children's book. You can find the link for that in the chat or in the comments if you're tuning in on Facebook. Bob, we do some quick hitter questions here at the end to kind of get the full picture of your Penn State experience. So let's start with your favorite class at Penn State.
So this is going to be strange because it has nothing to do with what my major was, but my favorite class, I think the one I remember the most is, in my last semester, I took a class on urban planning. And it was just an elective. But it was one of those things where I just didn't even know that was a job. I had never thought like people plan cities and that there's a rhyme, there's a reason for why things are where they are and how interconnected we are. And so I really loved it. I actually ironically pulled an all-nighter for the final and slept through it.
Oh, wow.
And the professor was fortunate to let me sort of just sit in his office and take it. So I was very grateful for that, because that would have not been great.
I still have nightmares of missing finals.
Oh, I do too.
I'm now removed so long that from my college experience, but I still have that nightmare. So how about if you could have dinner with anybody, who would it be and why? And maybe because you've done so much travel and you mentioned that you grew up outside of Boston, maybe where would it be?
That's a tough one. So you mean anyone, anywhere, right?
Anyone, anywhere, living, dead.
You know what? I would, let me think about this.
Yeah.
I really enjoy the work of George Saunders, the author. I think that would be fascinating. I love historians. I would love to be able to talk to Doris Kearns Goodwin or David McCullough, whose books I both love. There are some folks who have written I'm a big fan of Thoreau and Emerson. So Robert Richardson wrote a wonderful book about Emerson. So I probably would be drawn to people. I'm drawn to writers and historians. Yeah. So that probably would be where I would sort of start in terms of, I had to choose someone to talk with among the living. Where I would eat, it would definitely, not because of the pandemic, but I love eating outside. So it would be outside along the water. I don't know what specific restaurant it would be. Any excuse to get back to Boston would be welcomed, however.
Absolutely. Well, look, someone from Boston, Doris Kearns Goodwin, has to be high on your list. Right. You could talk to her about the Red Sox and just talk about baseball for the entire dinner. She is not only an accomplished historian, presidential historian, but as just a huge baseball fan. So that would be fun. I would put her on my list as well. How about your most unusual We Are moment? Maybe an unexpected place where you encountered a Penn Stater and someone yelled out "We Are," or maybe you were the person yelling out "We Are" to a group of people.
Yeah. So I guess I could use this as an example. I didn't realize, I think I knew one example, but when I gave that commencement speech, there were 6 different people from different parts of my life that were there with a child. So I ended the commencement address with "We Are," and they would respond Penn State. But I had no idea. I found out later when I was getting texts and emails from people I hadn't talked to in 20 years that they were actually in the audience at the commencement speech, and their children were graduating.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. How about your favorite Penn State sport?
Well, I think it would probably still be football. Although I would say that I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to go back with one of my daughters, both to a football game, but then we also took in a women's soccer game. Okay. And so now coaching, my daughters in soccer and seeing how great that team is, by the way, I might sort of switch my loyalties there.
That is a fantastic pick. Coach Erica Dombach was just on Coach's Caravan. She's one of our more inspiring coaches here at Penn State. 2015 national champion, I think, has one on the horizon with the team that she has coming back next year. And so that's a wonderful choice there with our women's soccer program. How about your favorite flavor of creamery ice cream?
More for sentimental reasons than maybe taste, but peachy paterno is always a classic.
Absolutely, a favorite here on Coffee Hour as well. Bob, if people want to get more information about your work or about the Moving Up Media Lab, where can they go to find that?
Yeah, if you go to movingupusa.com, you'll find links to everything that we talked about today.
Excellent. Well, Bob, I want to thank you for joining us on Coffee Hour and allowing us to share your story with Penn Staters. It's when Penn Staters are accomplishing great things that people associate that with the institution and increases the value of all Penn State degrees. And for that, we're truly grateful. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for all the great work you're doing.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in today. If you're a member of the Penn State Alumni Association, thank you so much for your support. If you're not a member yet, what are you waiting for? Go to our website at alumni.psu.edu, and you too can become a member of the world's largest alumni association. Thanks for all you do for the university, for the glory, and for the future. We are
Penn State.